Hi, my name is Tim Eames, and today we're going to be talking about radio broadcasting. This is part of the Comms 532 Approaches to Media Technology course, and we'll be going through Chapter 10 of Communication Technologies, Update, and Fundamentals. So we're going to be talking about radio technology today. Radio is close to all of our hearts. We listen to radio nearly every day. As a matter of fact, 92% of Americans believe that radio is important to daily life. The thing is about radio is that radio is changing. It's becoming different every day from 1961 when FM radio really came onto the scene all the way to now where we stream radio through different devices. I have a few here right now. A lot of us, we may listen to the radio here through the iPhone or a smartphone or a mobile phone. Some of us, if we probably, every one of us probably owns one of these, an iPod of some sort. The thing I love about this kind of technology is that it continues, the device gets smaller and smaller. However, it's able to hold more and more songs and content. So that's, there's a smartphone, the iPod, and then one of my personal favorites, the iPad. The iPad is just a great device to listen to music, to stream content, news, radio, talk. All those devices have helped define what radio really is today. So what we're going to be going through today about radio, we're going to go through a few parts and pieces of radio technology from when it began all the way to today. What we're going to talk about is the definition and promotion of radio. How do we really define radio today, and how is it being promoted across the globe? Also, we're going to talk about the history of radio. We're going to get into the AM and FM radio broadcasts, when they were invented, how they came to be, how they became to be such an important part of our lives. And then we're going to get into new developments of radio. We're going to be looking at HD radio, global developments of radio, what's happening overseas, satellite radio, low power FM services, some local stations that are coming onto the scene, and last but not least, we'll be looking at these very things here, internet radio, digital audio files, and podcasts. And then we're going to talk about the future a little bit. Where do we see things going, and where do we see radio developing, not only in our personal lives, but across the globe? First off, we're going to talk about a definition of radio. A good working definition of radio would refer to personal audio media, multiple selections and formats of audio content provided by a variety of sources beyond FM and AM radio. Again, that's a working definition, and the definition seems to keep changing. It was just AM and FM and stereo, and now it's audio content coming through various different sources. So that's a good working definition of radio. If we were going to generically term radio, we would call it this: audio entertainment supplied by terrestrial broadcast frequency, satellite, internet streaming, cell phones, and portable digital media players via podcast. So that's a generic term of radio. Of course, you can define radio in many different ways. It's all across the board compared to 50 or 60 years ago, when it really started to gain momentum. Now, there's different ways the radio has been promoted over time. The National Association of Broadcasters identifies 5 initiatives that promote radio technology and program availability. One of those initiatives is the NAB's Flexible Advanced Services for Television and Radio on All Devices. We call that Fast Road. Basically, this was put into effect to help accelerate the deployment of new technologies in radio, a way to make radio better for all of us. A second initiative, the National Radio Systems Committee, or NRSC, a jointly sponsored committee of Consumer Electronics Association, they came together to recommend a technical standard for radio receivers. So, that radio stereo you have in a car or at home, or anything that streams audio content, these committees came together to develop a standard, so you'd have good quality coming through each of those receivers. A third initiative would be the Radio Data System, known as RDS. This allows analog FM stations to provide digital data services such as song title and artist information. If you've ridden in or purchased a new car recently, most of the stereos in the cars today have this RDS system. When you turn to the station, it'll show the artist, it'll show the song that's playing, a neat advancement in radio. If you've ever ridden in a car and wondered who sings that, well, now you can know through the RDS system. The fourth initiative is HD radio. This is an in-band on-channel digital radio broadcast system. It's developed by Ubiquiti Digital Corporation, and it's a clear sound radio, even better than FM, and we'll talk more about that one later. And the fifth initiative that has happened of a promotion of radio technology is called Radio Heard Here. The consumer's promotional phase of the Radio 2020 campaign, and this is just put in place to remind consumers in the media industry of the value of radio. Radio is a very valuable technology. However, it's taken advantage of sometimes because of the fact that it's free, and most people don't realize what all goes into making radio broadcasts possible. So those are the definitions and the promotions of radio. Now we're going to get into the history of radio. Radio is dated all the way back to the earliest forms of wired communications. This would include the telegraph, the telephone, all the way back to those days. Now, no single person has been given the credit of inventing the radio, but there's been a lot of innovators throughout history. Much like the internet is today, back in the 1920s, the 1930s, and even the 1940s, that was the way you traveled around the world, was listening to the radio. That's what brought the world into your living room or into your car, much like the internet does for us today. One of the widely known inventors and innovators of radio, and I might botch this name, but it's Guglielmo Marconi. I hope I said that right. He is recognized for increasing the radio's commercial value and improve the operation of early wireless equipment to really help launch radio into the mainstream. Mr. Marconi did. Another person that is known for inventing and an innovator of radio technology is Edwin Howard Armstrong. He left his impression on radio, and probably the most widely known impression, he discovered regeneration, which is the principle behind signal amplification. He invented the super heterodyne tuner. This led to inexpensive, low-cost, high-performance radio receivers for us, the consumer, which therefore increased the penetration of radio into the U.S. homes and even homes around the world. So he created a lot of great inventions to propel radio into what it is today. As a matter of fact, in 1933, Edwin Armstrong was awarded 5 patents for FM technology way back in the 30s. So he's definitely been a great innovator of radio. Another part of history there's 2 traditional, we'll call them traditional radio transmission technologies as part of radio history. One of those is AM, also known as amplitude modulation. An AM signal, it varies in strength. I remember in high school I took a 1961 Mustang to prom. All it had was an AM radio. Every time we'd go under a bridge, lose the signal. That's just the way the AM signal is. So it varies in signal strength. If there's much interference, you don't get a clear signal. However, it can be broadcast over a wide coverage area. It does stretch out very far. So that's the AM, or amplitude modulation. Right after AM radio, FM radio was developed. Now this stands for frequency modulation. Much like AM varies in signal strength, FM varies in the frequency of the signal. It provides definitely a superior sound. However, the coverage area is more limited. It doesn't stretch as far as AM, yet the sound is more superior. Now, the oldest radio station was developed in 1920, a long time ago, and it broadcast an AM signal. And that was a huge advantage because that AM signal could broadcast over a large area like we've been talking about. And commercial FM radio did not really come onto the scene until the 1950s, which was some years later from the AM radio. And there's been some advancements with FM since then. The FM listenership expanded in 1961 due to the Federal Commission Committee, the FCC, authorizing add-on stereo broadcasting, and along with that, they ended simulcasting, which programs used to be broadcast on AM and FM. Now they had to choose one, AM or FM, and that was in 1961. Because of this, because of the FCC authorizing these, FM listening took off and actually exceeded AM listening in 1978. So very quickly, in a span of about 30 years, FM came onto the scene and then surpassed AM radio as far as listeners are concerned, in a very fast way. Now that's a quick history of radio. There are also new developments always going on in radio. With the new developments, technology improvements still have been slow for a few reasons. Technology improvements have been slow due to the marketplace did not want improvements or didn't see the need for these improvements. Everybody was getting what they wanted, so they never really pursued new technology for a long time there. A second reason is that station owners invested in modest technology changes. They didn't want to put the money in to making equipment better. They were happy with the way it was as well. A third reason technology has been slow to develop in the radio world is there's always been the question, what would happen to AM and FM radio if new technologies were created? And we're actually living in that world today. But that kept owners from putting money into the technology advancement because it could change. And the station owners did not want to invest money into a technology that would possibly become obsolete. And a fourth reason is that radio listeners, actually, the consumers expressed a limited, maybe limited we can call it, but limited interest in new technology, because right around the time radio was taking off, also the personal choice market took off as well. So you started to see 45 RPM records come out. The little records were produced, 8-track tapes. I remember listening to an 8-track when I was very young. Three Dog Night, I think, was the band. It was a good one. Cassette tapes after that, we can remember those. Then CDs, and then ultimately portable digital players. So the consumer market totally changed technology of radio in a sense that they want it individualized and weren't so concerned with the mainstream idea of a radio coming out the way that it could be. Another radio development happened in 1996 with the Telecommunications Act. This eliminated ownership caps, which was huge in launching radio into big technology advancements over the last decade or so. Owners were capped with the incentives of spending on broadcasting, equipment manufacturers the same way, and consumer electronics. There weren't really incentives to increase the technology in radio, but since the Telecommunications Act of 1960, there have been incentives to make changes, so you've seen a lot of new developments come on the scene. One of those developments is known as HD radio. This was developed by Ubiquiti Digital Corporation. They market their digital broadcasting technology to consumers as HD radio, a static free service without hiss, fading, or pops. So they market it as a improved advancement over FM stereo. HD radio was approved by the FCC in 2002. The first HD receiver was sold in 2004, and by 2010, the FCC listed over 1,500 HD FM radio stations and 292 HD AM radio stations. So the whole idea of the digital technology of HD radio took off very quickly. By mid-2010, there were over 2,000 HD radio stations and about 1,000 HD2 and HD3 channels, which covered 90% of the population. As of today, though, HD radio still represents less than 15% of licensed radio stations. One of the drawbacks of HD is that it takes about 8.5 seconds to get the HD signal once it finds the transmission. So it's a little delay there, which kind of is a negative aspect for HD radio. Another development in radio has been globally called the Eureka 147 system. Now, this system broadcasts digital signals on an L band, which is part of the spectrum known as band 3. It's being experimented or operating in about 40 countries, including Canada, the UK, Sweden, Germany, France, and like I said, 40 other countries is where it's being explored at. However, it's not designed to work in the US. It does not work with FM or AM signals. And due to the digital broadcasting of HD radio, that is where the US broadcasters prefer to focus their energy there versus the Eureka system. Now, in 2001 and 2002, launched the satellite radio. It's a subscription-based service, and it ranges from $10 to $14 a month. The two big names that you might have heard that were part of the launch were called XM Satellite Radio and Sirius Satellite Radio. There's been some confusion about those two names as of late because in 2008, the two companies merged to form Sirius XM Radio. So now they are together. The FCC authorized this type of service in 1995. However, it's not considered a radio service because it uses satellites to transmit a radio signal versus terrestrial broadcast lines here on the Earth. So it's technically not considered a radio, but a great advancement in radio technology. The downside to satellite radio, though, is that it only reaches 15.3% of people daily compared to 73.3% that are reached through typical broadcast radio. Now, there is a perk to satellite radio if you're a sports fan. It's the official satellite radio partner of the NFL, Major League Baseball, NASCAR, NBA, NHL, the PGA Tour, and major college sports. So I do love satellite radio for that reason. You can listen to whatever sports team you want, and you're actually listening to the home team's sports broadcaster. So that's fascinating to me, and I've always liked that. Aside from satellite radio has been another advancement. It hasn't been so mainstream, but low power FM service has been approved by the FCC as of 2010, January of 2010. Low powered FM service is a range of 100 watts, which is typically about 3.5 mile radius of broadcast. So it's a small, low powered service. As of mid 2010, there are only 864 LPFM stations in the US, according to the FCC. And then one of the last great developments of radio technology is internet radio, digital audio files, and podcasts. These are very popular right now because you can stream this content through a smartphone, through internet sites such as Pandora, Stitcher, and Twitter's OpenBeak internet audio. So this has really taken off. Most of the market is driven by the allure of consumers to the new technology of the devices. I mean, if you look at the iPhone, for example, it is so sleek and it catches the eye, and so most consumers listen to radio this way because of the device used to listen to it. That draws them to the market. However, only 10% of all devices make up the market, but 12.8% of all daily audio listening is done through this form of method of listening. Yet, 75% of all radio listening still takes place in the car, which is fascinating. Even though car stereos nowadays don't just broadcast FM AM stations, they can broadcast satellite stations. They even have a hookup for your iPod or your iPhone to stream the internet radio right through the stereo. Now there's also new developments in legislation which has to do with performance royalties. Congress is looking to pass a bill that would allow the artists and recorders or recording producers who own the audio content to receive a royalty from radio stations who play the content. Now, This could cause a lot of problems. Satellite and online distributors of the content already pay these royalties, but now we're looking at the traditional stations, AM and FM, to pay these royalties out as well, which could cost the broadcasters themselves hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And if you can figure that out, most of that cost will obviously be turned to us. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in radio down the road. Now, there are some current stats with radio that I'm sure you'd agree with from our textbook. Each week, more than 239 million people listen to the traditional radio. That's a lot of people. And advertisers spent $16 billion on radio advertising in 2009. Nearly 800 million radios are in use. That was back in 2004, according to the FCC. These 800 million radios are in households, private and commercial vehicles, and also commercial establishments. Now, there's one contrast to the current stats, and that would be the iPad. When Apple launched the iPad, it totaled more than 300,000 iPads sold the day it launched. And since 2010, Graham states that the download of apps has exceeded 1 million. So that is an interesting contrast to see where radio is going. Now, as far as the future is concerned, there's a few things to look at with the future of radio. There's digital radio technology. This is still has a potential run for consumers, just because we're always looking for different avenues and alternative ways to listen to our content. There's also satellite radio that is still on the scene. It still holds a promising market for its potential to generate multiple revenue streams through sale of its content, audio and commercial. It can sell the channels. It also can deliver different forms of data. So that's still a promising future for satellite radio. Also, there's HD radio looking down the road. This may be one of the most hindered technologies due to the fact that HD radio may offer more of a crisp sound, yet the receivers are more expensive, and the lack of ability to transfer and store files through HD radio receivers hinders the technology a little bit. And then finally, as far as the future is concerned, you have localism. This is the ability for stations to market CD quality content such as news, weather, sports information into the local markets. Now these are also becoming under attack because of national newspapers and television stations, and even local newspapers and stations developing smartphone apps, internet content that is from the local market. So the question is, what do we do with radio here? What content do you like to listen most on the radio? Is it a talk show, news broadcast, music? Is there a certain kind of music you prefer to listen to? How do you enjoy radio broadcasting for yourself? And the second question is, how do you usually listen to that content? Is it through a typical stereo? Is it usually in the car? Do you stream a lot of music through a mobile device or through the internet? How do you listen to that content? And third question is, where do you see the future of radio going? Do you think it will move entirely out of the traditional AM FM broadcast? Where do you see it going in the next 10 or 20 years? And that is radio broadcasting for Chapter 10. I look forward to hearing from you on the discussion boards. Thanks.